Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we'll be reviewing Christopher Nolan's war epic Dunkirk, the Netflix show Castlevania, written by Warren Ellis, and Trey Edward Schultz's creepy horror movie, It Comes at Night. Nick has also been watching the Channel 4 sitcom Nathan Barley, and we'll be finding out what he thought of that later in the show. But first, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, it's going to be a fairly soft recommendation, but in the last week or so, as of this recording, I have finished watching the Netflix series The Santa Clarita Diet, in which Drew Barrymore and Timothy Olyphant play a married couple dealing with the fact that the Drew Barrymore character has just become a zombie. And it's a sort of gentle suburban comedy. It's basically Imagine Weeds, only instead of the wife has become a drug dealer, it's the wife has become a zombie. It's about that level of slightly grim, but also quite light and frothy suburban comedy action. My life is definitely unchanged, but if you want something to watch while you're doing the ironing, or, as I was, having a sort of casual lunch at work, yeah, it's fine. It's a good half hour.
Is it slightly off-putting to be eating your food while you watch people eat other people?
You know, that didn't actually occur to me. Hopefully my colleagues weren't too nauseated. I mean, we sort of have our work lunch club thing where we watch stuff together, so I can, at the very least, I can sort of throw the responsibility out broadly and blame everyone else at the same time. But yeah, it is kind of weird that zombies have now become so domesticated and common that this show about a woman eating people is now basically casual light entertainment, the sort of thing you could do the washing to. Because it really is light as hell, even though there are some bits where people get quite horribly ripped apart. It's often sort of played kind of for laughs.
I guess it's a sort of black comedy in that sense, which does kind of have... The sort of black comedy sometimes takes the edge off the violence a bit. You know, it gives this degree of it not being believable, so people, you know, you can enjoy it more.
Yeah, it's kind of like the sort of lighter comedy bits of Dexter, only without any of the parts where Dexter tried to be like a serious show about examining the psychosis of serial killers. It really is just, lol, she's just eating that bloke's face. Oh, you know, lol, she's drinking a smoothie, only it's a smoothie made of person. Or lol, it's a suburban bathroom, but there's a person in it. And there are better jokes than that as well. But yeah, it's a fun show. It's got Timothy Olyphant in it as the husband, and he's someone I like from Deadwood and Justified and so on. And it also, as well as starring in those serious premium dramas, it turns out he's also quite good at comedy in a sort of, again, a very sort of light, twitchy, fun way.
I know a lot of people said the best part of the show is when they actually, address the concept, when they have the discussion of, right, so we're going to have to start killing people.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of joke, sort of like our sort of casual dinner table, pillow talk conversations about how they're going to hunt down and kill people. It's just silly.
Well, we've had zombie rom-coms, so I guess zombie suburban coms makes perfect sense.
At this point, I'm not sure there's any genre left that can't be somehow combined with zombies. I'm surprised the people who would die in Dunkirk, which we'll be discussing shortly, didn't all rise up and start trying to eat their former friends. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself now. Alastair, what else have you been experiencing?
I've been reading... This is a sort of a book about geek culture, so I guess rather than recommending people like a TV show or film or something, this is something, I know, a bit meta, a book looking at geek culture. But I've been reading The Geek Feminist Revolution by Kameron Hurley. It's a collection of sort of essays and short pieces she's written. It's nominated for a Hugo Award. It's got, a really interesting look at, different films, different TV shows, some of the problems with geek culture. It's very critical. So it does go into the issues of kind of like representation, especially representation of women. It's not a sort of a book that shies away from some of the important criticisms of geek culture, but it's also a book that loves geek culture and celebrates geek culture. And it's just, really interested in detail. It talks a lot about all sorts of different films, Marvel Cinematic Universe films, or Star Wars Force Awakens, or there's essays on Mad Max Fury Road, but also they talk about all sorts of older action movies from the 80s and things like that, as well as the politics of online forums and Twitter and who gets to dominate geek spaces.
Yeah, well, due to the speed of, on the one hand, the speed at which geek culture has become so weirdly dominant, and on the other hand, the painfully slow speed with which publishing tends to move, and indeed a lot of sort of the old-fashioned mediums like TV and publishing and movies. Things like geek culture and how we talk about things online and like online cultural discussion are clearly massively relevant, especially if, like we are, you may be surprised to hear you're into that sort of thing. There's not actually that much extensive literature on it in the established forms.
Especially as this book is, I think, a collection of essays that were published like online various places. So, some of the things he talks about are like things maybe from a year or so ago, like Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh yeah, I'm aware that although there might not be many like books about the inner workings of geek culture, there's quite a lot published online about it, surprisingly.
It's a really interesting book. Hurley herself is a science fiction and sort of fantasy author. So she also talks a lot about her own writing process and how she approaches characters and how she wants to make her characters stand out or be different from some of the archetypes of fantasy and science fiction characters. So if you're trying to write in these genres or just interested in the creative process, there's also lots of good stuff in there for aspiring writers, creative types, about how she goes about her work and how she sort of thinks critically about what she does. So there's that dimension to it as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I have read quite a few of Kameron Hurley's blogs, and I think she now has a podcast, as everyone does, called, I think it's Get Back to Work Hurley or something, which I think you can get from her website, where she talks about similar issues. So yeah, she is one of the big voices in this area. So yeah, it is would probably be a good book to read. Fortunately, I think, was it you gave me your spare copy of it? Because Alastair is so into the feminist revolution in geek culture, he had a spare copy.
Yeah, I was given 2 for Christmas.
Well, at least your friends and family know you, I suppose. Okay, first up, probably our headliner this week. It's Dunkirk. Not, of course, a pornographic Star Trek fanfiction, but the new war epic from director Christopher Nolan, he of Inception and the Dark Knight trilogy and a range of other classic films. Modern classic films. Whatever. Anyway, this is the story of Dunkirk during World War II, during which a lot of British soldiers were trapped on a beach in Dunkirk and had to be evacuated under heavy enemy fire. It features a cast of, if not thousands, definitely dozens, including Christopher Nolan standard players like Cillian Murphy and Tom Hardy, and slightly less common appearances like Kenneth Branagh, and slightly less common in cinema as a whole. There's, of course, One Direction's Harry Styles. It's by Christopher Nolan standards, considering he's known for quite complex, over-intellectualised films. It's actually quite a straightforward story of the Dunkirk evacuation and exactly how it worked. So, Alastair, we've seen it. What did you think of it?
Very, very good. It's an incredibly tense film. The premise obviously lends itself to being a very tense film with, you've got soldiers trapped on a beach, very little weapons between them because they've had to discard most of their hardware in their retreat, hemmed in on all sides, waiting to be evacuated while sort of, bombs rain down on them. Yeah, obviously a very tense premise, but it is incredibly well executed by Christopher Nolan. The man is incredibly good at directing and really good at just kind of putting together films and ramping up the tension. So this is really a film that has kind of looked at the fact that like war is a great source of tension in a film. It's not so much about, this isn't a film about the bravery of war or the sacrifice or even the nobility of it, like a lot of previous war films are focused on. And it's not even so much about the brutality of war, although there is some quite brutal bits in it. It's more of a film about how tense the situation is and how on a knife everything turns. So yeah, I was kind of riveted to my seat the whole time, just completely gripped by this kind of incredibly tense story that unfolds.
Yeah, it was good. It was, considering Christopher Nolan is, as I said like 10 seconds ago, quite well known for incredibly constructed, complicated films, or, taking something that needed to be complicated and making it complicated. This is almost weirdly uncomplicated. Like, a lot of historical films will try and, sometimes quite brutally, with a big hammer, insert a, plot structure onto history, or, have a understandable plot or quest take place inside the historical event. And Christopher Nolan here almost stubbornly doesn't. It really is just a film about some stuff that happened around Dunkirk in a quite sort of back and forth way. The entire focus is on, the individual tension in every individual moment, which, I'll be honest, as someone who's, I guess, a bit more plot-driven, sometimes found a bit frustrating, but nonetheless, the individual moment-to-moment stuff is incredibly tense. He definitely does a good job of selling the constant threat of death, which is, the main thing here. I mean, even though, I guess there's not really any reason for us to just monstrously spoil the entire film, but not that many, major characters die. It isn't a massacre of a film. Even though there are, some depressing deaths, it's not even particularly bloody. Yeah, there's not even that much dialogue. It's definitely a film where you have to actually look at the pictures.
Yeah, the dialogue is very sparse. there's no exposition dialogue, or there's no kind of trying to like I say, bring in like wider things about, you know, the war or stuff, or trying to fill in loads of additional information. Like just at the beginning, there's a bit when a soldier picks up a German propaganda flyer that basically shows the Allied forces are surrounded on all sides and can't escape because of the channel. And that's kind of the only exposition that you get. There's very little like explanatory dialogue. Everyone talks in what is obviously a very believable way because all the characters fully aware of what their situation is, so there's no need to discuss it. You know, they speak as little as possible, and they kind of really focus on getting themselves out of these situations, but they are faced with these like insurmountable obstacles in many cases. Like there's several points characters point out when they're stuck on the beaches in Normandy, just looking out, saying like, I can almost see Britain, and they're like, well, seeing it's not the same as being there. They are trapped, and various like destroyers arrive, and the soldiers, there's a lot of tension as the soldiers are kind of queuing to get on and sort of jostling a bit to go onto the boats, and then a destroyer will move away and be attacked by a Hinkle or a German U-boat. The characters are constantly coming across these obstacles to do the relatively simple thing of cross 20 miles of water.
The only character who does seem to be perhaps doing a bit of a performance is perhaps Kenneth Branagh as one of the senior officers there. And, I don't know, I guess maybe that's the joy of being an officer. You can spend some quality time standing on a pier, staring woefully into the middle distance and delivering speeches about what's going on, instead of getting stuck inside a ship and being shot at.
I thought Cillian Murphy did a very good performance as a soldier who was on a destroyer that got torpedoed and was pulled out of the water by Mark Rylance, who plays a civilian whose boat's been pressed into service. Minor history lesson for anyone who isn't aware. The way they got everyone out of the situation in Dunkirk is they requisitioned pretty much every boat, regardless of how big or small, anywhere in the sort of the south of Britain, and send them all across the channel just to pick up as many people as possible. So, and we see that kind of civilian story told through Mark Rylance, who has a small, like, kind of pleasure boat. He does, like, tours and stuff of the cliffs of Dover, and he sort of sails out to, you know, to rescue some soldiers, and he picks up Cillian Murphy from a wrecked destroyer on the way, and he's completely traumatized by nearly drowning as the boat went down, and he does a very good performance of a man completely broken by war.
Yeah, he's there, and you recognise him because, that's Cillian Murphy. I recognise him from millions of other Christopher Nolan films and also Free Fire. And then you expect him to get, like, a really big part, especially because, he's, as you say, representing a man who's been traumatised by war. And then because this film really is more concerned with the sweeping sense of Dunkirk than going into any one character's head, he actually doesn't get that big a part, to be honest. He's in maybe a handful of scenes. He does some things. He doesn't just sit in the corner crying. But, pretty much everyone has quite a small part, and a lot of the people who do have a bigger part aren't even the more recognisable actors. I mean, if I didn't recognise One Direction's Harry Styles, I probably wouldn't have recognised any of the privates, who probably get the largest chunk of the movie.
Yeah, the film does focus on, most of it's on the common soldier or the everyday Tommy. Yeah, because it's their story of them trying to escape, and there's various different ones. Harry Styles' soldiers get sort of trapped in a civilian boat they find that they think they can wait in there, and when the tide comes, it would lift the boat up and then they can sail it across the channel, but then they get trapped when some Germans start shooting at them and they're trapped in the boat, and then the Germans puncture the side as the tide comes in, the boat starts to fill up with water, and they nearly drown in what could be one of the tensest and scariest scenes of the film. If you're in any way claustrophobic or scared of drowning, this film will exploit that fear quite mercilessly. Quite a few scenes involving people in destroyers or small ships that get holed or sunk and sinking, and it really did impress in me how horrendously awful it would be to be trapped in a boat, in a massive metal boat sinking towards the bottom of the sea, filling up with water. There's a lot of bad ways to go, but that seems utterly awful. You're devoid of light and air. So that was pretty tense.
Yeah, and there's lots of individual good moments where you get quite into a character's head in the moment and think, oh, well, that's terrible. Like, there's a bit towards the beginning where one of the main soldiers just comes upon a dude just burying someone else in the sand on the beach, and it's just, you get the feeling this is happening in quite a lot of places around the beach, and it's just a bit sort of... Not that there's a lot of blood and gore in this film, it's not that sort of war is hell narrative, but it is all quite affecting. It does bring it home to you a bit, if anything, sometimes maybe even slightly harder than if they'd been doing like endless spurts of monologues and blood and gore. So even if part of me was still hankering for a bit more of a clear story to hang my hat on, as a technical exercise in going, right, here's a slice of Dunkirk, choke on that, it definitely did its business.
I mean, the other thing that was really good was the air combat. Tom Hardy playing a Spitfire pilot, trying to sort of fend off the bombers and the Messerschmitts that are trying to shoot him down. Really good acting. I think someone, I can't remember who, said it, might have been Mark Kermode, that in this film Tom Hardy acts with his eyebrows because his face is covered by the pilot's mask most of the time, but he still does a very good performance considering he's pretty static but he obviously is involved in a lot of tense action scenes.
Well, yeah, again, Tom Hardy, the sort of guy you half expect to have leading the film. He just sort of appears in these intermittent scenes with a mask almost entirely covering his face, and yet he's still one of the most memorable bits. And of course, the way they space out the air battle compared to the rest of the battle is one of the only sort of gimmicky Christopher Nolan tricks in this film, in that there's a sort of sliding timescale between the boats, the air combat, and the events on the actual beach itself. Yeah. Like, I think it's the air combat takes place over an hour, the boat trip takes place over a day, and the siege on the beaches takes place over, is it a week?
Yeah, it's a week. So, which is a little bit confusing at first, although the film does subtly point this out to you, in that rather than having everything sort of involve in a linear sequence, every story has their kind of beginning, middle, and end at the same time. So even though Tom Hardy's story takes place in less than an hour, and the Mark Rylance on the boat, his story takes place over a day, and Kenneth Branagh on the beach, his story takes place over a week, which is why it can be confusing when it might cut from Mark Rylance to the beach story and it'll be suddenly the night, because it's taken place over a longer period of time. But it does really work because, obviously it means the main dramatic points happen at the same time, all the stories conclude at the same time. There's also you see different events from different point of views. So there's the air combat, they're trying to sort of shoot down a Hinkle that's trying to bomb a boat taking people from the shore, and then later you'll see where that fits into the timeline of Mark Rylance's boat, who may be nearby, and then when it fits into the timeline of the people on the shore.
I don't think it really... I mean, it's people have made a lot of it in reviews, and I suppose I should share some of the blame for this, as I did bring it up in this review. But it's not even that big a deal, is it? I mean, shows like Game of Thrones or whatever, which do cover a lot of characters over a lot of time or geographical area, do this sort of shit all the time. They just don't put a little thing on the screen measuring the exact amount of time it takes.
Well, I think it's important that you know how long the time frame is throwing over, because they are technically all in the same place at the same time. They're just moving at different speeds. I know they're not doing something new. Like I say, it's, as you say, Game of Thrones does it, other things do it. I just think the way it's used is very effective.
Oh, it's very effective. I'm not sure he even needed to signpost it, to be honest. I think it works pretty organically. This is my perspective as someone who watches a lot of TV and a reasonable amount of film, some of them by quite pretentious writer types, and therefore I'm used to people just casually tossing off this sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I've spoken to at least one friend, hi Ross, if you listen to this, who complained that, to be honest, he probably have got it without the labels, and the labels just made him think harder about it and took him out of the film, and maybe he has a point, I don't know. Or maybe other people would be a bit more, oh hang on, they've just cut from day to night, what's that about? So this might be entirely subjective, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's, as I say, this does come across as a fairly simple, organic film from a director who is sometimes known for being a bit clever or obtuse.
Yeah.
And I don't think the time gimmick gets in the way of that. I think it's still a very accessible, emotive topic. Did you feel at the end, as Alastair said, there's an evacuation, some boats survive. I'm not going to spoil exactly what happens in the film to the characters, but there's a big patriotic surge at the end. And the patriotic music starts, and some Churchill quoting goes down in one way or another. Did you like that bit, or did you feel that after 2 hours of quite stark war film, without that much in the way of emotive stuff or talking, it was suddenly a bit cloying?
It was a bit different to the tone of the rest of the film, I suppose, but they did need something, I guess, to wrap it up with. I mean, if they were going for, I guess, happy ending, most people got out alive. So I guess they needed that, and they wanted, I guess, to end on a positive note with, the fight will go on, and especially because just after Dunkirk is obviously pretty much the lowest point of the war for the Allies, in that they were almost defeated, and it looked like Britain would be defeated soon. So, and the speeches that Churchill gave really did capture that moment. That's taking it back to the historical context, which mostly throughout the film kind of didn't really go into. It was more concentrated in telling this one story about this one event, which they need to link it up. I did like the bit when you see all the small boats coming to rescue the people, because I do like that this is a film that celebrates the contribution of the everyday person, or the person in the street or what have you, or the person in the boat in this case, to the conflict. This isn't a film like Patton or something like that, about the contribution of these great historical figures who changed history. This is more about the people and how, their story and what they went through. And I did like the moment when, all the people, and it is a very inspiring story, which is why it makes such a good film, when all the ordinary people in their small boats that couldn't carry many people, but together they could rescue, and they saved hundreds of thousands of lives, maybe even changed the course of the war. And I do like the fact that at the very end of the film, the last shot is of one of the regular Tommies, won't say which one to, I don't want to reveal who lives and who dies, but the very last shot is of a regular Tommy in the sense that this is his story. This is the story of, the person on the beach, not the generals in the command center. And I like that element of it. Maybe it didn't need Churchill quotes or, sort of big stirring patriotic music at the end, but as I guess they felt they needed that because it's a war film.
It's a war film, lads. Get in there.
It is a war film, but it is not a very conventional war film in many senses. Like, it isn't about these great figures, the main players of the war, Churchill, Patton, Montgomery, or de Gaulle, Stalin, the others. It's not so much about them. They're barely mentioned in it, or apart from the Churchill quote. It also isn't about this sense of, like, the importance of the sacrifice or the great patriotic calling or even the tragedy of it. It's got much more in common the way it's shot, the way it's put together. It's like a crime film in that it's just leveraging every situation for the maximum emotional potential to create tension, not to create a feeling of sacrifice. Because even a film like Saving Private Ryan, which is obviously got some great bits about how gory and violent and traumatizing war is, there's this underlying sense, especially at the end, of like, oh, the nobility of all this, or oh, the sacrifice, oh, the laying yourself down for the greater good. And the last shot of Saving Private Ryan, obviously, huge shot of the American flag blowing majestically in the wind. But that's not what this film is about. This film is about the everyman, the danger he was in, and fortunately the fact that a lot of them got out of it.
Oh yeah, and obviously it gets, as you say, that's pretty emotive, and that elicits a swell of emotion, and therefore goes against another common criticism of Christopher Nolan films, that his work is cold and robotic and without any contact with humanity, unless the human in question is Batman. Yeah, and again, it's hard not to feel something at the patriotic surge at the end, even if I felt it went on a bit too long. Yeah, no,
I think this is certainly a film that has the ability to resonate a lot, and I think it will connect with a broader audience than, say, Interstellar, because for one reason or another, science fiction films sort of feel like more confined to their genre, whereas this kind of has the ability to kind of break out and really impress people. And obviously, and especially The Dark Knight Rises did have that ability, as to break out of the confines of this is a comic book movie or this is a summer blockbuster into like, this is a big important film that people should go and see and pay attention to.
Well, yeah, I think people aren't just here because of the Dunkirk spirit, although we are British, and I hear some people in Britain like that sort of thing. They're here because Christopher Nolan is, I don't know, I don't like using the word auteurs, but he is that sort of filmmaker, still working today and producing work that's generally seen as being of a decent standard. And therefore him making a film is still some sort of event. Yeah, certainly.
And he has a distinctive style. He's very good at putting together action scenes in tension and creating tension. There's just the way, like, the air combat, the way there's like the sort of shots down the side of the Spitfire or through the blades, or the many sort of awful, quite disturbing scenes of people being trapped and drowning. There's just the tension is just palpable, and it's shot in this very technically astute way that Christopher Nolan's well known for. He's just incredibly competent, and especially in this film because he was shooting probably on water. Finding just a stable place to put the camera must have been difficult half the time. So even before we begin saying how well film is put together it must be very difficult to make in the first place.
Yeah, it's true. Part of me is always disappointed I didn't see it in IMAX, so I could marvel at the sheer scale.
It would have looked good in IMAX. The other thing, just say that was absolutely superb about this film. In fact, might have been overall the thing that had the strongest impact on me was the score by Hans Zimmer. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, he's very good at using like unusual sounds or making conventional sort of classical film score instruments make unusual sounds and quite discordant. But this whole film is kind of undercut with this vague kind of sense of ticking. Like, literally you're constantly bombarded by the soundtrack that says like the time is running out. Because the time is running out element is obviously essential to the thriller, the fact that most thrillers are characters pitted against the clock. And in this film, the time is as much an enemy as, say, the water or the Germans. The whole film is just shot through this like amazing score that constantly cranking up the tension, constantly like there just ticking away, winding you tighter and tighter and tighter. Hans Zimmer has done some great scores for Christopher Nolan films. The Batman scores are very distinctive, as is the one for Interstellar. But this was exceptionally good, worked perfectly for the film, and is a masterful piece of cinematic music.
Okay, I've just got access to Spotify Premium, so I might have to seek it out.
Yeah, I've been listening to it this week whilst at work.
Excellent. I'll wait till I can find something really big and war-related to write, and then I'll get that on.
Yeah, I'd urge, if you were in any way doubting about seeing this film, go see it. If you're worried about gore, it's not as gory as a film like Saving Private Ryan, but it is very tense and has some quite disturbing scenes but are more like psychologically disturbing. But I would recommend this as probably one of the best things I've seen so far this year, and probably one of the best things that's likely to come out this year. So if you're on the fence or anything like that, without wanting to overhype it, I highly recommend going to see this film.
Certainly, if you fancy going to see it, then get in there while it's at the cinema. It's a good cinematic film.
Next, we'll be reviewing a new horror film from director Trey Edward Schultz called It Comes at Night. Set in a post-apocalyptic world where a mysterious virus has wiped out almost everyone, one family shelter an isolated house, relying on their extreme caution and routine to stay alive. However, when a desperate man comes in search of water for his family, things start to get complicated. This is a low-budget independent film that's been out for a few weeks, and we saw it recently. Nick, how did you find it?
Well, it's our second film of the episode, which seems to be led by a decision to fuck off the big picture and, just really zero in on specific characters and their specific situation. And yeah, it was pretty good. I do genuinely wonder if my enjoyment of this has been slightly impacted by the fact that the raw plot mechanics and sort of general tone of it did feel like about a dozen different episodes of The Walking Dead. Sort of the general, we must be ruthless and harsh and inhuman about our decisions to fight the evil virus. And how does this impact our wider humanity? I mean, it's much better than most episodes of The Walking Dead, because The Walking Dead has a lot of over-expository emotions dialogue, and also tends to just sort of move past the moral decisions in the end, because ultimately the characters need to still be our heroes in 6 seasons' time. Even though I suspect my exposure to that formula did slightly blunt it for me, it was a very good rendition. And it did get into the characters and provide quite a lot of good twists and some genuinely, gently horrific moments. Yeah, it asks the traditional who are the real monsters question with some real bites. It takes a while to go there, but it does go there. It's a decent horror film.
Yeah, I think because maybe, as you said at the start of the episode, zombies have become quite popular and are now used in lots of different stories, and post-apocalyptic is very popular, and post-apocalyptic and zombies go well together, that this is treading some familiar, well-trodden ground. I haven't seen The Walking Dead, but obviously what you just described and what this film does reminds me of things I have seen, like the video game The Last of Us, which tackles these films very well. But it executes its story well. I'm fond of saying there's no cliched ideas, there's only cliched executions. And by focusing on the minutiae of the story, how do these people live together? What is their routine? What is it that keeps them going? In this case, specifically routine and, caution in order to keep themselves alive when almost everyone else is dead. And by focusing on that, it brings out a real depth of the characters, even though there's no need for flashbacks or long expository bits about their lives. You get a very powerful sense of who they are. And also they come across as quite real, which is why you have conflicting sympathies with them, because they're real, complex people. Like the dad, the sort of leader of the family that begin the film and encounter this other family, he comes across first as very harsh, maybe even a bit paranoid, and then over time, when you realise how dangerous the world is, you kind of have a bit more sympathy for him and that. But still, he does still come across as a bit harsh to the people around him.
Well, yeah, but a lot of the twists in this film, or the reveals, aren't like horror movie, he's possessed by the devil, or the baddie was in the cupboard the whole time, or something. It's quite sort of subtle turns of character, like you've been led to think it's this way, but it's actually that way. But now this has happened, was it actually that way all along? And does any of it matter because they've just done this other thing? And it sort of advances quite clearly through it in this quite sort of inevitable way, I guess, as I think I've said about other things before. It has that sense of weary, oh god, inevitable disaster that works quite well if you can pull it off.
Yeah, I think that sense of the kind of, the weary, inevitable disaster is the sort of driving force behind the film. Not so much like a shocking reveal or a big MacGuffin of there being a big villain or a big monster or something like that. Although this is a horror film, this isn't a film that's particularly full of big horror jumps. It's a kind of a slow-burning film, even though it's not particularly long, but it's quite a slow burner. It's very creepy, like you say, sort of psychologically to bleak in the sense that it's lumbering towards death and disaster. But there aren't many kind of big bang scares and stuff. It's more of a sort of suspenseful, creepy film.
Yeah, it is quite slow and lingering. I mean, because we saw the film together, and I did feel an element of, as you may recall from our conversations afterwards, certain elements of, oh, was that it, after it finished? And I don't know, it did stick with me though. It's sort of the way it did what it did was very controlled and very creepy, and it felt, people did things, I don't want to spoil it, but, horrible things, which didn't feel unnatural, like they were being driven to do it because of the plot. It felt like they got there naturally, and watching people be driven to horrific acts of nasty murder is quite unpleasant, and that's the source of the horror of it. There's not a huge amount of, as you said, you don't get much background to the apocalypse or the characters, really. You don't really have that much sense of what they were doing pre-apocalypse, and in this case it doesn't really matter that much. I do think the ending's a bit weird. I don't want to go exactly into how, because again, spoilers, it really would be pointlessly ruinous to spoil this film in that way, but the ending was really sort of click, always that is, to an extent, but I felt they could really have taken a few of the shots a little bit longer, and I wouldn't have felt quite as slightly weird when I left the cinema. But yeah,
this is going to be a difficult conversation to have because we're going to be dancing heavily around spoilers, but I'll just sort of, as brief as possible, say I really did like the ending, and I thought it worked very well because I kind of liked how sort of clean it was, although obviously it's emotionally very messy, so maybe that's not the right word, but I thought that the ending was good. But what I think comes out is it's an unusual ending, which is why it seems to have divided opinion.
I know things usually speed up towards the end, but the film itself is so sort of slow and steady that it just was a bit sort of, I don't know how to illustrate this. Illustrate it in the form of weird humming noises. The film sort of goes along sort of and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know, it was just strange. It felt a bit weird and jarring, but yeah, fair enough.
I think that hum is about as good as we can summarise the ending without actually spoiling it. So
I'm curious how that'll come out in the final recording. We'll see whether our audience will be treated to the series of noises I just made.
Yeah, well, it was certainly ambitious.
Much like this film.
I can't follow up on the hum, so maybe move on to a different aspect of the film. One of the things I really liked is the very sort of deft touch it has with characterization, just like the little bits you find out about the families and the characters just through the small bits of dialogue. A sense of who they are, but not a lot. And like, there's one main scene which is like a kind of discussion between the fathers of both households, and you find out a bit more about them. But there's also a sort of tension that comes out of that, which is sort of weirdly left unresolved. I just realised that most of my notes I have are quite spoilery.
I was tempted not to say anything spoilery, but as a result, that does mean I'm very close to having run out of notes.
Maybe it's a short segment we say. It's interesting. We've got lots to say about the interesting twists along the way, so go see it and find out.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. Having said that, apart from maybe the ending, I don't really have to say a lot about, the way it develops in that it's just quite sort of, it builds the characters up well to the horrible things they have to do in order for it to be horrific. The ending, although, as I say, I found it a bit abrupt, and perhaps this is one of the reasons it lingers with you. Once it's had time to fully unspool in your head, it just sort of fully dawns upon you how sad it is.
Yeah.
I mean, harking back to our review of The Witch, there's ending very quickly and not showing enough, and then there's when we reviewed The Witch and I complained that it drew out the ending a bit too much and showed more than it really needed to. So it's hard to win with me in horror film endings, it seems.
Yeah. But I thought this ended much better than The Witch, because The Witch was presented with one of the basic horror movie or horror novel or really any horror story problem, which is there's a sensible build-up, especially if you're playing on the question of what is out there or is there something out there. And It Comes at Night does also play on the what is out there, is there something out there, in that there are various strange things that happen. They hear weird noises. They don't go out at night, and you don't really know why. But the thing about The Witch is that it suffers from the problem, which when you get to the end, you have to come down one way or the other, and you have to have a reveal. And the reveal can be disappointing. And I think in The Witch, it was a bit disappointing in the end, even though the build-up was very good. Now, because It Comes at Night has quite an unusual ending, certainly it kind of managed to dance around and avoid that normal horror movie problem. But it's kind of veered into unconventional territory, which I guess can divide opinions. The other thing I like about this film is it throws out lots of stuff, and there's kind of loads of bits that messily sort of hang around in the film, which is kind of like real life. Not everything in real life has like a resolution, and there's lots of bits that come out. Similar to Dunkirk, actually. There's not a lot of exposition. You don't really know what the nature of the virus is. You don't really know also, that their routine keeps them safe, but you don't really know why and at what point people are contagious and at what point things are dangerous, which, means that there's a sort of strange confusion. You're not really sure why they go out at night. They wear masks at various points. They do various things to protect them, such as not going out at night, but you never really explain what the nature of the kind of virus that's wiped out humanity is, because I guess all the characters in the film know what it is, and there's no reason for them to explain to each other, so we never find out.
Yeah, I mean, there's no big speech about what happened before. There's not even a bit where they talk about their jobs from before. Anyway, I basically said all this about how they don't talk much about before. So
if you want something a bit different from your horror, especially if you're tired of like things you just go bang and try to make you jump, which although can be very good, can also be very bad. See The Blair Witch and other examples.
If you enjoy the episodes of The Walking Dead where they have to kill people and then confront what it means for their humanity, and you want to see a better version which actually interrogates the murders and the morality of them in a way that actually feels like it matters, then this is definitely that. Okay, and third up today, we're going to be talking about Castlevania, the new animated adaptation of the classic video game series that I have not played. It's a horror game about killing vampires, and it stars Trevor Belmont, the current descendant, well, current in the 15th century, of the long-running Belmont family of monster hunters who attempt to kill a whole bunch of demons inflicted upon the world by Dracula as punishment for people burning his wife as a witch. This is a anime-style adaptation released on Netflix in 4 parts, written by the writer Warren Ellis, who we've covered before both in the form of his novel Normal and the excellent comic Fell. So yeah, we've watched all 4 episodes of this. Alastair, what did you think of it?
It's interesting. I don't really watch much anime, and I'm not exactly sure how different this is in approach to other animes, other than being, I think, primarily done in the English language rather than in Japanese first. It was certainly a different and unusual viewing experience. The one thing that struck me about it is that it is very video game-like. It certainly wears its influence on its sleeve in that regard. There's various episodes that are quite dungeon crawly in that sense that the main characters have to progress through a dungeon fighting monsters and avoiding traps. The series ends with pretty much a final boss battle. There's magic weapons and spells that are picked up and sort of allies made along the way. It definitely follows the narrative structure of a dungeon crawling video game, much like Castlevania, which it is based on.
Have you played Castlevania? Any of the
I don't
Castlevanias?
think so. Unless I played it ages ago. I haven't played any of the more recent ones. I might have played one of the older ones back in the 90s when I first started gaming on my Windows 95 PC. Well, my parents' Windows 95 PC.
Yeah.
I might have played some back then. It does all sound vaguely familiar, but I think if I did play a Castlevania game, it was probably when I was about 13, going on for 18 years ago. People have lived their whole lives and grown old in that time, so I'm not intimately familiar with the franchise. But just the general kind of narrative structure, kind of themes, and the kind of approach to storytelling was very reminiscent of video games, especially ending with a final boss battle.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed this. It's definitely not big or clever, but considering the not exactly high expectations one tends to have when one hears video game adaptation, it had some fun, it had some style, it moved along. The jokes were, for the most part, actually funny. And the action was pretty dynamic. There was some good sort of blood and gore. And Warren Ellis got his voice in there, mostly in the form of the main character's weary remarks, and a really funny but kind of tonally weird conversation about goat sex in the bar at the end of the first episode. Which,
yeah, that was very strange.
That was deeply strange. Although I'll take deeply strange, to be honest. At least it did make me laugh.
It was funny.
It definitely had the ring of a film that's been chopped up into 4 parts. Like, even down to the fact that only the first part had like a full intro sequence with like full credits and graphics, and the other 2 just had a quick title card.
Yeah, although I'm not sure if that's like a Netflix thing where they do that. They drop the full intro, because I watched The Expanse recently, and the first episode has like a long TV intro sequence, and the others just have a bit that flashes up and says The Expanse, but I don't know if that's just a thing Netflix does.
It's hard to tell. I mean, long intros have gone a bit out of fashion in a lot of TV shows, I guess, because they have to claw back every minute they can for the actual programming, especially on network shows where they have adverts. But this isn't one of those, so it doesn't matter. I quite enjoyed it. It's not going to get hours of repeated watching, but I will probably voluntarily watch the second season.
I'm certainly intrigued to watch the second series because not a lot happens in the first series, and most of the first series seems to be set up for the second series. My main criticism of it is not actually that it's too video gamey, because some of those narratives do work. In this case, I think they certainly work to some degree. My main criticism of it is that it's all set-up-y. In fact, the whole thing just seems like it's manoeuvring characters into position for a story it's about to tell. Like, the main character doesn't appear in the first episode at all, or only right at the very, very end, and he's just pretty much in the background. The whole first episode is just filling in the story of this country and Dracula and his army of demons and all the reasoning behind that. That's just the whole first episode. And then by the end of the first series, although you've had a bit of this main character and a few supporting characters, he's clearly just manoeuvring the character into the position he needs to be to start telling the story. If this was Star Wars, basically Series 1 is the Tatooine bit.
That's kind of why I think this may have been a chopped-up film, or possibly a chopped-up movie-length pilot or something. It does feel a bit like that, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some financial or format-based reason why it had to go out this way. Maybe Netflix weren't willing to commission a second season. They now have, but, until they saw some reception to the first one. So they gave them X amount of money. They made as many episodes as they decently could, and now they get to make a second season, which happily is twice as long.
Yeah, that sounds like, a proof of concept sort of thing, especially as they've created this first series to end in such a kind of now the story begins sort of moment. It's not really even a cliffhanger, it's now a kind of, now the band of heroes is together and united in their common purpose, let's see what happens. So, well,
that's what gave me the sort of end of pilot episode vibe, yeah.
Yeah, this is the shortest thing we're probably reviewing in this whole episode, because it's only 4 25-minute episodes, despite the fact that it's a whole series of a TV show and 2 other things we're reviewing of our films. So yeah, it is a very much feature-length pilot carved up into shorter bits. So there was a lot of setup, but there was some quite interestingly gory setup, some sort of nice villains. I did like kind of the evil clergyman, was good, yeah, and as well as obviously Dracula being very goth and very evil.
Yeah, Warren Ellis, when he's allowed to just go full melodramatic exclamations, does do some good stuff, and also some of the more sort of over-the-top action stuff in terms of the lead character chopping people up with his whip, or demons dismembering people. It was a bit sort of unnecessarily gory, but it suited the animation style quite nicely.
Yeah, those were some of the best bits.
Yeah, there's a bit where in I think the last episode, where a demon confronts a priest in a church, which is both quite creepy and quite entertainingly horror-y.
Yeah, that was good. And there's also, towards the end of the last episode, before the final boss battle, there's a bit when the main character, Trevor Belmont, gets all the townspeople together to defend themselves from a horde of demons, and sort of effectively organises them so that they can cleverly turn the odds in their favour. And that was a good scene and a good action sequence.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of what people would say is bad about video game films is that they just degenerate into weightless action. And one of the ways in which that very extensively gets around it is that there's a lot of focus in this, I think, on actually good action choreography. Action scenes you can actually follow, where the moves have impact and you actually care what the individual people are doing. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why this is a good video adaptation rather than yet another shit one.
Yeah, I think you're right that saying this is raising the bar for video game adaptations, because that genre or sort of subset of cinema has not been fresh pickings in the past. In fact, Alone in the Dark could be the worst film I've ever seen.
Oh my god, I think I slept through half of that somehow with its incredibly tedious garbage.
You might have been better off. In fact, you were definitely better off. So yeah, so if anyone's wondering what I think the worst film of all time is, it's Alone in the Dark. Based on a video game, although I think one of the things that make it such a bad film is that they jettisoned pretty much everything about the video game and just made up some bollocks.
Yeah, I think I was better off asleep. It didn't even sound like it was entertainingly funny. Everyone just seemed a bit crushed by it.
It's not bad in a way that, like, Sharknado is bad and funny. It's not even bad in the way that Highlander is a bit bad and funny. It's just bad.
Anyway, so yeah, the anti-point of this Castlevania review. Definitely watch Castlevania instead of Alone in the Dark, if you somehow get a choice between the two.
That is a decision I wholeheartedly endorse.
Yeah, if you like Warren Ellis' stuff, this is definitely worth checking out. He gets his voice in there, and he is known for his sort of quite meticulous action choreography in comics, and he definitely brings that to make it good in the ways I just said.
Is he known for the sort of slightly sarcastic tone at all? Yeah, because that was good. I mean, the characters weren't amazingly uncliched, if that double negative works. There was a grizzled hero with a dark past. There was a scholarly magic woman, sort of an ancient or powerful being with lots and lots of magical powers. But at least Warren Ellis did scatter, quite a lot of sarcastic quips and funny one-liners throughout it. Especially the grizzled hero is thought of, given a bit more depth by the fact that he is kind of general reluctance, and the fact that he's kind of a bit put off by absolutely everything and just kind of just wants to get drunk and lie around and just be rude to people who inconveniently want him to save them from demons. That was redeemed that character a bit from being so much of a cliche.
Yeah, there's a lot of world-weary, leave me to drink Warren Ellis characters. He's been relegated into supporting cast a bit more in his recent work, possibly because he's aware it's become a bit of a cliche, but I don't know if you remember from Fell, his boss, his superior officer at the police station, he was a bit of the world-weary drunk Warren Ellis character. He was only in that comic for a few scenes, but yes, that is a Warren Ellis thing, but I find it funny in small, controlled doses. And Richard Armitage, the excellent actor who has been in Spooks and Hannibal, and I gather played, was it a Hobbit in The Hobbit? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, he's a dwarf in The Hobbit.
Oh, okay, he's a dwarf, yeah.
He's the king of the dwarves.
As long as he's short somehow, which is just funny because he's clearly such a tall, handsome man. He does deliver the world-weary one-liners with a bit of good British panache. Yeah,
he's a very good actor. I saw him in The Crucible at the Old Vic, and he was very, very good. The other thing that struck me about this is that there's quite a lot of characters that are OP. I don't know, for those who are not maybe down with the internet lingo, overpowered or have too much ability. Like the Dracula villain seems to be capable of absolutely anything at any point. And the other sort of magical being that Belmont has to fight at the end is also basically, seen to be possessed of unlimited godlike power. I know Dracula's supposed to be the main villain, so having a big powerful villain can be part and parcel of a lot of fantasy or science fiction stories. But I don't know, it did make me feel like, what are the limits to this world? And is there any tension in the story when the villain is so godlike in his power?
Well, if the villain seems godlike, presumably the tension is how will the heroes beat him?
No, there is that.
I don't know. As I say, this feels a lot like set up, so I guess a lot of that is questions for future episodes. I think a lot of the sort of over-the-top stuff is perhaps part of the sort of anime aesthetic they're going for, the sort of big over-the-top fighting and big moves and that bloke at the end's massive, massive sword.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah, the only bit that did sort of stick out a bit as does this work for me was there's a bit at the end, which I guess I shouldn't spoil, which is sort of played as a twist, and clearly it's sort of quite... I saw this coming a mile off. But it didn't bother me enough to put me off the whole thing. It was just a bit, I'm not sure me and the show are as one on this one occasion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, to borrow your previous point, it struck me as a sort of twist you would get at the end of a feature-length pilot to a show, in that it's not obviously a twist that's so massive that you would build an entire series arc plot around it, or even the twist at the end of a film. It's more of a kind of, that's an interesting narrative complication to put on the end of this thing, which affects the dynamic that's been set up for the series to come a bit. Other than that, it's just part of the fact that this is clearly like pretty much a feature-length pilot, rather than like a sort of series in its own right.
Yeah, I will definitely watch the second season. Yeah, as somebody who follows Warren Ellis' career with some interest, it's cool to see him getting somewhere in the TV end of it. A sort of gentle thumbs up for me. It's not high art, but it's an enjoyable cartoon to while away an hour and a half.
I'm pretty sure you hit the nail on the head at the top of this segment with it's not big and it's not clever. Well, it's certainly not big because it's very short. And I don't think it's really doing anything startlingly original, but, it's entertaining enough to see what they do with the second series.
Yeah, and based on my very limited reading of a couple of internet articles, the Castlevania fandom seem happy enough with it. Their main complaints seem to be the small number of episodes, so yeah, clearly he's doing something right.
Yeah, that's what I got from my Twitter feed. People who are into their old school retro gaming were very happy with it. Last time, I recommended that Nick watch the Channel 4 sitcom Nathan Barley, which is written by Chris Morris and Charlie Brooker. It's a sort of satirical look at internet culture and urban hipster cool culture of the kind of early 2000s period. It's mainly remembered now for being, very, very funny, quite dark, but also a lot of way that it kind of foreshadowed or predicted a lot of things about the kind of urban hipster culture that have become more prevalent. I wouldn't go as far to say it saw into the future, but it was incredibly prescient and has only become more prescient with time. It's also, a very unusual collaboration between, Chris Morris and Charlie Brooker, two great comedic writers. It's very odd, sometimes quite unsettling sitcom, quite anarchic. It sort of loosely follows a long-suffering, weary journalist called Dan Ashcroft, who is the one person who sees all popular culture as infantile and everyone who's into it as idiots, while he is relentlessly tormented by king of the cool idiots, Nathan Barley, with his website, trashback.cock. Yeah, so we've been rewatching the first and only series of Nathan Barley. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I do like the fact that this is... Charlie Brooker is a guy who famously hits a certain height of nihilism at some stage. And in Black Mirror, he has, if anything, slightly mellowed a bit at times. He clearly likes to throw in a few episodes where people get a hopeful ending, but this is young, full nihilism Charlie Brooker just writing 6 episodes of mostly horrible things happening to deserving people. Basically, there's like 2 characters who probably don't in some way deserve to suffer, and they're both the sort of off-to-the-side straight people to an extent. Everyone else just gets repeatedly caned. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I have no idea whether they only did 1 season because of ratings or cancellation or whatever, or whether it was an artistic decision, but it did feel by the end that they'd probably taken it as far as they could take it. Like, if they did another season of this, they'd probably need to drastically change the whole setup.
Well, they do wrap it up very succinctly at the end of the first series, and I think it's a very good point to leave it at. Certainly, like, if they came back to it now, it might be a bit hard to go back and undo that ending. But I think they did plan a second series at the time, but their plan for the second series was that Nathan Barley gets cut off by his rich parents and has to move in with his older brother in the suburbs who's going through a divorce, and basically the horrendous uncoolness of everyone else's life finally catches up with Nathan Barley, which would be different in tone from...
Yeah.
The first series. But anyway, other than the theoretical second series, what I liked about this show is that I really like my cringe comedy, Peep Show, The Office, Alan Partridge, things like that. This one I think is one of like the ultimate in cringe comedy. There are some incredibly cringeworthy moments that even I find sometimes a bit too much. Like in the first episode, when Dan Ashcroft tries to escape from the hellish publication he works at, full of idiots, and tries to get a job at a glossy Sunday supplement magazine, and he has his job interview that he's just terribly prepared for. It's so cringeworthy, and the job interview goes badly, and at the end he's just trying like begging for them to give him a job, and it's hilarious, but it's very, very cringy.
Yeah, that was probably the cringiest moment in a lot of the series. That one moment really towered over the whole thing. It was just it kind of defines journalist Dan going forward a bit, really, because towards the beginning you sort of think, oh, maybe he's our relatable everyman hero who we're meant to root for. By the end of the first episode it's made fairly clear that he's just, even if he might have a point about Nathan and that being idiots, he's so smug about it in a way that he doesn't really justify. It's quite hard to actually like him.
Yeah, well, Dan Ashcroft is a massive dick, which is why you don't feel too bad at the way he just is permanently tormented by Nathan Barley continually popping up in his life. He is just quite awful. He's like really self-involved. Like I say, he's really smug. He treats his sister pretty badly. In fact, that he like co-signs her name on a loan, and then she has her camera repossessed by a bailiff. She's a documentary filmmaker. And just generally treats almost everyone else he meets with contempt. So you don't really feel that sorry for Dan Ashcroft.
Yeah, whereas conversely, Nathan is, of course, awful in his own way, but up to a point, he's kind of sincere in it.
Yeah.
You can sort of see why people like him, even if he usually reliably does something incredibly selfish and stupid that then makes you remember, oh no, he's terrible as well.
Yeah, obviously Nathan Barley is a character created to be horrendously annoying, and he is also pretty bad. Like, the way he tortures his techie guy who, kind of does all the coding and stuff for his website and animations, and he just sort of relentlessly picks on him and does these horrible pranks on him. Played by Ben Whishaw before Ben Whishaw became a big deal. I think it's one of the reasons why this show is considered so prescient is that it's got quite a lot of people who went on to be very famous in small roles, like Ben Whishaw, and Benedict Cumberbatch pops up in a couple of episodes.
Yeah, with short hair and a weirdly young, innocent face. I barely recognised him at first. I always thought it was Ben Whishaw again. I didn't entirely realise how alike those two look.
Yeah, there's a certain similarity. The thing about Nathan, even though he is a horrendous human being, there is something about him that everything he does for the love of it, which is why he's so selfish and impulsive and irritating. But he doesn't do it for money. It's not artificial, the hyper cool life he lives. He does it for the pure joy of it. There's a great article, I think it was published by The Guardian, a long read about Nathan Barley, we can link to it in the show notes, that came out 10 years after the original show was broadcast. And one of the things it pointed out is that, like, those people who did that kind of early internet urban culture stuff, though some of it could be like really irritating, they kind of did it for the pure love, whereas now people who do that sort of thing, it's done by big publishers for money. For example, they said if they did do a second series of Nathan Barley now, what it would be is that Trashback and Sugar Ape have been bought by big American publishing conglomerates and are forcing them to do what they do, but just to make maximum amount of money, and it would become a bit soulless. Whereas there was something about Nathan, how he does it for pure love and not for personal gain.
Yeah, but he's basically the Robert Webb character from Peep Show, isn't he? Jeremy.
Yeah, just a bit more likeable and a bit more successful, yeah. Well, a bit more liked by other people, I suppose, yeah.
But yeah, and there's a couple of straight woman characters who Yeah, it has to be said. If you go back and look at the female representation in Nathan Barley, there are 2 women in it. One in each of the 2 major sets who basically serve to look irritated by the men.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the 90s.
Yeah.
As you say, I'm never sure how prescient it is. I don't know. I mean, modern YouTubers are in some ways more sincere than Nathan, or at least, I don't know, maybe I just don't watch the right YouTubers, because obviously there's been recent stuff like PewDiePie getting homeless people to hold up Nazi signs or something, which is Nathan Barley-esque to an almost terrifying degree.
Yeah, I think the Twitter got to that joke pretty quickly. I think when that happened, yeah, it was like, oh, Nathan Barley's come real again. I think the YouTube and stuff that I follow, although they do that whole kind of, this is my life, come join me on the videos, which on it with Nathan Barley does, their tonal approach is very different to Nathan's, which is basically, I'm so cool, look at me and my amazing coolness and the stuff I do. But I'm pretty sure there are definitely YouTubers out there who are like that. I will bet good money on that. I think there's other things that kind of, where it's picked up this reputation of being prescient, other than finding megastars, or they're in James Bond or Sherlock franchises. There's the kind of bit where on Nathan's website, although it looks really like, even like late 90s with all the flash animations and stuff, he makes like animal videos and stuff, which obviously the internet stock and trade now. There's things like how Sugar Ape, their office, Sugar Ape being the magazine that Dan Ashcroft works for, really does resemble a tech startup. Speaking of someone who worked in a tech startup, how it's got the kind of stripped down walls, clearly based in a former East End warehouse. They have air hockey tables and video games, and kind of there's a lot of larking around.
Yeah, it's true. Maybe the problem, if anything, is we're almost living in a post-Barley world wherein we had the stage of everyone, as you say, sitting in disused warehouses, and then people realised there was some money there, and now it's sort of been bought past that.
Yeah.
If you look past the aesthetic shit, I'm possibly contradicting my own point now about how prescient Nathan Barley is or isn't. Obviously, the sort of terrible internet nihilism, the sort of mentioning rape in every other word just because you can, obviously that's still out there somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, Nathan Barley's like liberal use of the N-word and stuff, and all the other artists in his circle who a lot of them do the shocking for shocking value. Like there's the guy, what's it, 15 Peter 20, who's this artist whose stick is he takes pictures of celebrities urinating. And I wonder if they asked the permission of all those celebrities that they clearly photoshopped pictures of them pissing to be in the background of his gallery. Jamie Oliver's in one of them, I seem to remember.
Oh, I refuse to believe they actually did.
No.
But then again, it's Channel 4, and this was the period where Channel 4 was known for edgy comedy, so maybe it was good to be okay with it, who knows?
Yeah, yeah, definitely that aspect of the kind of rude for rude's sake or shocking for shocking's sake of internet culture is definitely still around. Maybe, I don't know, it's worth watching in the episode, but there's the Sugar Ape, when they do the photo shoot, I think it's in like the 5th episode, there's a lot of like Sugar Ape. In fact, lots of things Sugar Ape do as a magazine are clearly shocking for shocking's sake.
Well, yeah, including the main joke in the first episode where they've changed their logo and made the SUGA tiny and just sort of sitting in a tiny dot inside the A, so that it's actually just got rape written across it in massive letters. That pretty much represents their entire MO, to be honest.
Yeah, and in the rest of the series, whenever Dan Ashcroft goes anywhere, you're from Rape magazine, and he's like, it's Sugar Ape. It's just the way that the idiots around him are sort of permanently tormenting Dan.
Yeah, sort of nihilism, sort of 4chan nihilism, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It always makes Nathan Barley himself look kind of an idealistic vision, because although he's being a twat and invoking offensive things for no reason, he's not really doing it ironically, is he? I mean, I don't know.
No.
I mean, God knows why he thinks he's doing it, because he's noticed other people do it or because it gets him attention. But he's not doing it in the sort of clever, ironic way we have now. So again, if anything, we've transcended Nathan Barley and become worse.
Oh, great. That's the worst thing that can be possibly said about our civilization. You're right. Nathan Barley is entirely unironic. He does it out of genuine affection for, like, he generally thinks this is the coolest way to live. He doesn't do it as a commentary or in postmodern or anything like that. He just does it. There's something weirdly like endearing about him, despite he's incredibly offensive.
There was a weird sort of curve during the series where it started out with Nathan's awful, sort of softened him a bit in the middle, and to be honest, there was a bit around episode 4 where I was a bit sort of, is this getting tiresome? Am I sick of this? Is Nathan getting a bit defanged? And then episode 5 and 6 are absolutely awful again, just to remind you what's going on. I'm not going to bother spoiling the punchlines because why? But episodes 5 and 6 are pretty depressing and do remind you that although Nathan Barley might be likeable in a sincere way, he's also a massive, massive arsehole.
He goes to some dark places, especially in those 2 episodes, like, be warned. But if you like that sort of thing, then it's also a masterpiece, a tour de force in that kind of comedy. But it really can be quite dark. So, and also various other ways, like one thing that does date it quite well rather than it being prescient is the edgy politicalism of everything from the early 2000s around the time of the Iraq war and that. Like Nathan Barley, he's in the second episode, he's putting on a party in a club, and the flyer, which just says on it, "Get the fuck on down," and it's got the picture of all the prisoners from Guantanamo Bay sort of handcuffed in with their heads down and the orange jumpsuits and the bags on their heads, and you're basically like, that's just being edgy by using politics to be edgy, which I guess a lot of people do in a cynical, nihilistic way now, but back then that was really the way to be cool. I seem to remember being at university at the time. There's also the way he's like constantly mentioning like the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center and things like that, just to be, again, like, to be really edgy.
Surprisingly immediately post 9/11 jokes from Nathan Barley, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a weird one. There's also like some other just like generally quite funny, strange things, like all the sarcastic lines. I think one of the things that's prevent it from dating badly is that they didn't use much slang of the period. Instead, they invented their own slang for it. Like, there's one bit when Nathan's like, "You should check out my website. It's well futile." It's like the fact that, like, rather than saying cool, he says bum, as in like your ass. Like, there's a bit when Claire's showing him videos. "Do you want to see my videos?" Like, "Yeah, bum." It's like, I think it's just really weird. But it does mean that it hasn't dated by using kind of contemporary references that have aged, which I think one of the reasons why it has this reputation for being so prescient.
Yeah, I can't decide if it's surprisingly good at predicting what Shoreditch hipsters still look like, or if it's just that that's how I see Shoreditch hipsters looking, because I haven't been to Shoreditch for a while. I suspect it's a bit of both. Or maybe the look of the Shoreditch hipster just hasn't changed much in the last decade.
Well, sort of. Well, it's I guess it's sort of evolved to a degree. I mean, there's some similarity and stuff, like the tiny bikes that everyone rides around on in Nathan Barley. I think that went out of fashion. Although loads of people skateboard in the show, which went out of fashion and now is back in fashion. So these things all come around in circles. Yeah.
Well, that was your fortnightly "oh god, we're older" moments for moderate fantasy violence, everybody.
Yeah, we're not into skateboarding here. Sorry about that.
No. If anything, I've reached the age where I grumpily shake my invisible fist at skateboarders. Invisible because I don't actually do it, because I'm scared of them.
Also, it's interesting that this show has like the collaboration between Charlie Brooker and Chris Morris, and you can tell obviously like the kind of sarcastic stuff about, you know, kind of Sunday supplements or, you know, newspapers or, you know, sort of hipsters and urban culture is a kind of Charlie Brooker sort of knowing thing that he does, but it's also got that Chris Morris, like, hyper-realism sort of thing that, like, sometimes, even though it's such a bizarre fantasy world that they characters live in, sometimes it's just, like, more real than reality in a strange way. Like, just, I guess, how the show sort of comes at you. There's, like, various bits, like, Noel Fielding plays Dan Ashcroft's housemate, who's just this obnoxious DJ who plays the most insane music all the time. But there's just something so incredibly hyper-real about it that only really, like, Chris Morris could have come up with.
I find it quite hard to pick these collaborations apart to see what comes where. There's quite having read a fair few Charlie Brooker columns and watched all of Black Mirror, every so often someone says something which I think, okay, I could possibly hear that in a Charlie Brooker column.
The other thing that makes this like indisputed like sort of Charlie Brooker product is that Charlie Brooker originally created Nathan Barley for the website he ran before he was famous in any regard. Yeah, shout out to internet geeks from the late 90s if you remember TV Go Home, a fake radio TV Times website, which I believe is still on the internet, that Charlie Brooker wrote, just that list all these fake, made-up, very, very strange TV shows, lots of odd ones. And there was a returning TV show in his fake guide just called Cunt, about the exploits of this awful man called Nathan Barley. And there was always written, each episode of Cunt, the description was just one very, very long sentence full of like just awful things. And somehow he managed to pitch that to Channel 4, and they said, yeah, we'll make a show of that. Probably have to change the title. It ended up on TV, and it is surprisingly funny.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as I say, Charlie Brooker's definitely older now, and he started, you know, mellowing out and making things like San Junipero, which are actually actively happy. You can see the young nihilistic Charlie Brooker pounding at the walls here.
Yeah, you can see that kind of anger and sort of bleak take on the world in the fact that Nathan Barley's awful, and most of the other characters around him, including Dan Ashcroft, are also awful. And Nathan never really gets any comeuppance. Like, even in the one episode you think he might get some comeuppance, he actually pulls it off at the last minute and ends up, even when he's humiliated and depressed, he managed to turn that into being a cultural superstar in Japan for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's on 4OD for free if you're willing to put up with about 5 minutes of adverts in the middle. And I'm guessing you might have to be in Britain, although I've never actually double-checked that. Maybe the fact that they've got ads in it means you can just watch it anyway.
The DVD is impressive because it's taken the the ethos of Nathan Barley and expanded it to every aspect, such as the DVD itself is really irritating. Like, the menu system is designed to be purposefully really, really annoying. It's got awful music or an awful video and it's just really difficult to use. So everything about the show is annoying, including the way the DVD is put together. So if you really want to commit, then there's a DVD out there with some very irritating
somebody still
menus.
buys DVDs, then yeah, I myself live in quite a small flat and went full streaming years ago.
Well, I'm glad that you liked Nathan Barley, if like is the word for a show like that. Ordinarily, this is the point when I would ask Nick to recommend something to me, but we are actually going to do something slightly different for the next episode because we won't be down the cinema or watching so much Netflix, as I'm going to be away for a while at Worldcon 75 in Helsinki, so I'm very excited for that. Hit me up if you're there. Because of this, we're going to be doing, for the next episode, a double recommendation feature where we'll both be recommending something, and that will be the sum total of MFV 43. So, with that in mind, Nick, what are you recommending me for the next episode?
Well, I was going to recommend you a Daredevil story from the early 2000s to tie in with this Defenders thing we'll be covering in the nearish future. But then I concluded that the story I was going to recommend is quite heavily derivative of an earlier Daredevil story, and to be honest, in the name of continuity and, I don't know, getting to the bottom of it all, I should probably recommend you the original. So that original is Born Again, the Daredevil story by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, which was released in 1986, a mere 2 years after I was born. And so yeah, this is an 8-part story in which bad things happen to Daredevil. Let's just leave it at that for now. Bad things are going to happen to Daredevil. So yes, I look forward to discussing that with you in about 20 minutes, because peek behind the curtain, guys. We're doing this in one massive sitting, so we've got it backed up for when we're both away. Because I too am on holiday, just not at Worldcon 75. Anyway, that's me. Alastair, what are you recommending for this massive recommendation orgy?
Well, I'm going to recommend you one of my absolute favourite films, one I saw first when I was a teenager and rewatch quite regularly because I absolutely love it. It's also a film that turned 30 this year, and it's Withnail and I, starring Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann.
I was given this by my mother for Christmas for DVD several years ago because I guess she thought it would be my sort of thing, so evidently you're not the only person who thinks they should recommend this to me.
Well, I'll be interested to see what you think of it, whether both me and your mum got the recommendation right.
Your mum jokes, the height of wit.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe on your podcatcher of choice. While you're there, consider leaving us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find back episodes of this show and the occasional written piece by Nick and myself.
Okay, and if you want to engage with us even more, then you could go on Twitter and follow us as @MFV Podcast, or you can search for Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook and like us there. And we will attempt to let you know when the new episodes go up and what we think of the latest episode of Arrow. That last one will mostly just be me. Anyway, I myself have been Nick Bryan. You can find me on the internet at nickbryan.com, where new fictional content is this close to going up, and also on Twitter as @nickmb. I'm also on Instagram at nickbryan.com if you want to see some pictures of stuff. I have been, again, trying to post there as well.
I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlastairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. We also have an audience survey going on right now, because we want to find out more about our listeners. There's a chance you can win £20 worth of Amazon vouchers if you fill in the survey. We haven't had many people fill in the survey, so if you go online and do fill it in, the chances of you winning the £20 are quite high, so be that as an incentive.
Do it. Take Alastair's money. Take it.
The money's got to go to someone. The link to the survey can be found in the pinned tweet on our Twitter account or in the show notes for this episode on the website. Thank you very much. Tune in next time, where we'll be discussing Daredevil Born Again and Withnail and I.
Bye then.
Bye. like, you know, literally you're constantly bombarded by the soundtrack that says like the time is running out, which is this, you know, the kind of
Sorry.